White House reaction. President Trump answers our questions on the decrease in the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. A cardinal's future. The head of the Archdiocese of Washington faces growing criticism. Bound for Beijing. A report from the Vatican on what a possible deal with the Holy See and China would look like. And it's a beautiful day. Pope Francis meets an international rock star to talk about education. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 19th, 2018.
To the families who have lost loved ones, America grieves with you.
President Trump travels to North Carolina for a first-hand look at the damage left behind by Hurricane Florence. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. As floodwaters recede, President Trump headed to see firsthand the devastation left by a hurricane-turned-tropical storm. Florence is blamed for at least 37 deaths in 3 states. FEMA is describing the relief effort as extremely critical, and President Trump pledged to be with the victims 100%.
God bless you. We will never forget your loss. We will never leave your side. We're with you all the way. And to all those impacted by this terrible storm, our entire American family is with you and ready to help.
President Trump handed out food and drinks at a Baptist church in New Bern, a riverfront city on the coast that experienced severe flooding, with the president's motorcade then drove through a storm-damaged neighborhood. Before the president left for North Carolina this morning, correspondent Mark Irons pressed him for answers about his decision to lower the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. and about whether he would meet again with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Mark joins us now from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president responded to 3 of my questions. He told me the U.S. is making tremendous progress with North Korea in the hope they'll abandon their nuclear weapons program. President Trump also gave me his reaction to this week's summit between North and South Korea.
We had very good news from North Korea, South Korea. They met, and we had some great responses. I got a tremendous letter from Kim Jong-un. As you know, it was delivered 3 days ago. We're making tremendous progress with respect to North Korea. Prior to becoming president, it looked like we were going to war with North Korea, and now we have a lot of progress.
Kim Jong-un has promised to dismantle a rocket launch site and the country's main nuclear site if the U.S. takes reciprocal actions. It's not clear at this point what those would be. North Korea also announced plans to work with South Korea on a joint bid for the 2032 Summer Olympics. Before he left the White House, I asked the president if he plans to meet again soon with Kim Jong-un.
Will you meet with him, Mr. President?
A moment earlier, I asked the president about the administration's decision to limit the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. For the 2019 fiscal year starting October 1st, the number of refugees admitted will be capped at 30,000. That's the lowest number in recorded history.
Why are you cutting the refugee cap to 30,000?
Because we want to be able to take what we can handle.
The current refugee cap is set at 45,000, but the administration has allowed less than half that number into the U.S. During the Bush and Obama years, the average cap was between 70 and 80,000, though the actual number of refugees admitted never quite reached those levels. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. It's a battle between the U.S. bishops and the administration. The State Department is on defense over its decision to cut for the second straight year the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has more from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Spokesperson Heather Nauert says the new cap of 30,000 is not an arbitrary number. She says it came after careful consideration by a number of government agencies, not just the State Department. From here, she says the number could change depending on what Congress says.
There were a lot of headlines that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, mischaracterized this as a new ceiling. This is simply a proposal that was put forward to Congress on the part of the administration.
Heather Nauert describing the next steps in determining how many refugees the United States will accept starting October 1st. After meetings between Congress and the White House, the final decision will come down to the president.
This year's refugee ceiling reflects the substantial increase in the number of individuals seeking asylum in our country, leading to a massive backlog of outstanding asylum cases and greater public expense.
Secretary Mike Pompeo defends the administration's proposal of 30,000 refugees, despite calls from global humanitarian groups that this year's cap of 45,000 was too low. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is slamming the decision. Bishop Joe Vasquez, the head of the conference's Committee on Migration, says, quote, offering refuge to those fleeing violence, torture, or religious persecution is a cornerstone of our history. We as a country are blessed with vast resources, making us capable of securely welcoming those fleeing harm. Closing our doors on those seeking such safety is not who we are as a people. The United Nations is calling on other countries to pick up the slack and take in more refugees.
There are more vulnerable refugees in the world today in need of resettlement than there are places made available by governments.
But that seems unlikely to happen. European countries have returned 13,000 migrants coming from Libya this year, forcing the North African country to house men, women, and children fleeing the Middle East. Today, European Union leaders are meeting in Austria to talk about solutions to the migration crisis. Back here in the U.S., Catholic bishops are encouraging members of Congress to urge the administration to raise the cap on the number of refugees. Despite the president saying the U.S. can't handle any more, the bishops say we can. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Where in the world is Cardinal Donald Wuerl? That's the question on many minds, from Washington, D.C. to Rome. He said last week he would meet Pope Francis soon to discuss his resignation. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us from the Cardinal's Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Cardinal Wuerl submitted his resignation 2 years, 10 months ago at the mandatory retirement age of 75 years old. But despite the rumors, the Cardinal spokesman says he is not in Rome and is yet to meet with the Holy Father. But here in Washington, the pressure is mounting.
Cardinal Donald Wuerl faces allegations he didn't protect children from predator priests. Wuerl was Bishop of Pittsburgh from 1988 to 2006. On the front page of today's Washington Post, a story that he allowed a priest accused of sex abuse to take care of his sick mother in Ohio without alerting authorities. That priest allegedly then went on to abuse another child. The case is included in a Pennsylvania grand jury report outlining decades of abuse and hundreds of predator priests. Another allegation came up in 1992. Twins said they'd been abused by Father John Crowley, beginning when one of the girls was 16. Psychologists deemed he was telling the truth when he denied the allegations. Crowley returned to his parish. Stories like these have angered Catholics. About 120,000 people have signed this online petition urging Pope Francis to remove Cardinal Wuerl as Archbishop of Washington.
Jesus said, "Be perfect as my Heavenly Father is perfect." So we expected more leadership from him, and his failure to lead, his failure to act with moral courage.
A deacon who served the Cardinal is also calling for Wuerl to step down.
I felt, as I expressed in my letter to the Cardinal, that as a matter of conscience, I could no longer attend to him personally, particularly in view of the events of the last several weeks, notably the publication of the Pennsylvania grand jury report.
Now, the Diocese of Pittsburgh tells me Bishop Wuerl pushed for reforms and used church law to remove offending priests from ministry. Now, here in the Archdiocese of Washington, the laity are responding in multiple ways, including with prayer. They're going to have all-night prayer vigils in some parishes, and they're starting 9 days of prayer novena on September 29th. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Pennsylvania's Attorney General and several lawmakers are pushing a plan to allow victims of clergy abuse there to file civil lawsuits. The statute of limitations expired in many of the allegations in the state's bombshell grand jury report. But the legislature is considering a 2-year window for survivors to seek compensation. Catholic dioceses oppose the measure. In one of the largest settlements ever awarded by the church to victims, the Diocese of Brooklyn will pay $27.5 million. The money goes to 4 men who say they were sexually abused as boys by a lay worker at a parish. In a statement, the diocese says it hopes the decision is another step forward in the survivor's healing process. The woman alleging she was sexually assaulted by Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh calls for an FBI investigation. Christine Blasey Ford's attorney says it should be the first step.
If the senators who have come forward and said they want to treat this seriously mean that, then they'll have an investigation of these allegations so that we all go into this more informed.
Senator Lindsey Graham responded in a statement requiring an FBI investigation of a 36-year-old allegation is not about finding the truth, but delaying the process until after the midterm elections. It is imperative a committee vote be taken as soon as possible. We'll have analysis of the Kavanaugh controversy coming up later in the show with the Heritage Foundation's Genevieve Woods. A bishop in India accused of raping a nun asks the Vatican for a leave of absence. Franco Mullikel denies the charges, but says he wants to step aside during the police investigation. He is accused of assaulting the nun in 2014 and sexually abusing her multiple times. Despite media reports to the contrary, the Holy See is denying that a Vatican accord with China regarding bishops will be signed this month. The Vatican press office tells EWTN News the dialogue between the Holy See and the People's Republic of China continues. There is nothing else to add at the moment. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, reports on this possible deal seem more insistent than they were before. What are Vatican observers saying about what a deal could look like?
Lauren, the main sticking point of any deal with Beijing has long been who has the ultimate say in the appointment of bishops. Now, Beijing seemed to be demanding veto power over the Pope's choices of bishops. Now, that's something that's unacceptable, as we know, for the Church. Now it would appear that negotiations have led to an agreement that the Holy Father would have the final say on appointments after all. But according to Asia News, and that's a news site that has its finger on the Catholic pulse in China, there are strong doubts that deal or no deal, the communists will give up on their demand to control the Church and its bishops. Now, last month, Beijing's most senior official for religion wrote, "Religious matters in China can't be controlled by foreigners." The fear is, for example, that were the Pope to block a potential bishop's appointment, the Chinese could react by rescinding the entire accord or increasing persecution of the faithful. Now, as we know, there are 12 million Catholics in China out of a total population of 1.4 billion, Lauren, and about half of those 12 million are faithful to Rome. The others belong to the Beijing-controlled, led patriotic church.
Well, one critical issue is whether a deal would include papal recognition of several of those illegitimate bishops who are supported by the communist government. Do you think the Holy See, or what are people saying, would they agree to that?
Lauren, it would appear the Vatican is keen for this to happen in order to avoid the ongoing ordination of bishops that aren't approved by Rome. The Jesuit publication America is reporting this decision was apparently communicated just a few weeks ago, and the magazine says that we're looking at a provisional accord that would be revisited in some years. And while the Holy See recognizes this isn't a good agreement, it's the only one possible at the moment. Asia News says Beijing is taking advantage of this alleged desire of the Pope's for an agreement, and that it could push for other bishops to be approved whose loyalties aren't to Rome but are still to Beijing.
Persecution of Catholics continues to persist in China despite these ongoing talks. And if a deal is imminent, will there be an easing of the persecution of Catholics?
Well, there are restrictions on religious education for children, and Beijing tries to control the administration of churches, of Catholic churches. So while the foreign ministry might be pushing to repair relations with the Vatican, as we remember, they were cut off in 1951, the body overseeing religious affairs is against the deal, apparently, and critics of the agreement fear the Vatican is playing into the hands of Beijing by wanting a deal at any cost. Supporters of an accord say, however, evangelization is the key, Lauren, and with 1.4 billion souls to be saved, that has to be the Church's primary focus.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Police in London are investigating a possible hate crime against Muslims. A confrontation between people in a car and a large group visiting a Muslim community center developed. Anti-Muslim comments were made and the car sped off and hit 3 people. Officials say the injuries are not life-threatening. There's a lot more to come on EWTN News Nightly. The Holy Father reaches out to the Jewish community of Rome, and a policy expert examines today's North and South Korea summit and what it means for the U.S. Pope Francis sends his greetings to the Jewish community of Rome. The Jewish faith celebrates 3 major feasts this month, including Yom Kippur, or Day of Atonement, which ends tonight. As you heard earlier in the show, North Korea leader Kim Jong-un and South Korea President Moon Jae-in are wrapping up their 3rd summit of this year. The leaders today say they have agreed to make the Korean Peninsula a land of peace after 70 years of hostility. They also want to rid the area of nuclear weapons. The 3-day meeting ends tomorrow. And joining me now from New York City is Gordon Chang, Daily Beast columnist and author of the book Nuclear Showdown. Gordon, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much.
Once again, this is a promise from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to denuclearize, and today's announcement has received mixed reviews. In your opinion, was there progress today?
There was progress, but it wasn't much progress. These are gestures that Kim Jong-un is making. The biggest thing that he promised was to dismantle the Yongbin nuclear complex, which is their only plutonium reactor. But he's conditioned that on reciprocal promises from the United States, which have not been specified. So this is not really the advance that we were hoping for. You know, at this point, we would like to have seen a lot more progress. And clearly, the Trump administration's frustrated.
Does this validate concerns that North Korea does not intend to live up to its promise of denuclearization?
Well, it looks that way. I mean, Kim Jong-un said the right words. Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president, clearly wants to push Kim in the right direction. And he wants to do that because Moon understands that, before the North Koreans give up their weapons, there's really no choice, there's no chance of unification of the 2 Koreas, which is Moon's overarching goal. So, you know, Moon is a little bit helpful here, but when you step back and look at this, there's a lot less here than first appears.
Well, as you say, the thaw is happening between North and South Korea. How should the U.S. use that to its advantage?
Well, the United States just needs to convince both parties that we insist on the complete dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear weapons program before there can be these joint inter-Korean development projects that Moon wants, and before there can be any unification of the 2 Koreas, which is what Moon wants, and certainly Kim Jong-un wants that as well. So for us, I think it's almost using the threat of sanctions, and sanctions are really important because they're the only things I think that will move Kim in the right direction.
So in June, President Trump said that he didn't want to use the term maximum pressure anymore because we're getting along. So do you think the U.S. is sending mixed signals when it comes to enforcing sanctions?
Oh, certainly mixed signals, Lauren. You know, President Trump had a very effective maximum pressure campaign where he cut the flow of international payments to North Korea by about half. But sort of since middle of May, end of May, the administration has signaled that it was not going to really apply with full vigor the sanctions. And so, for instance, the administration did not designate about 36 Russian, Chinese, and other front companies. And because Kim Jong-un changes his front companies all the time, that really allowed Kim to hollow out the sanctions. Also, you know, we've allowed the Chinese and the Russians and even the South Koreans to violate the sanctions openly. So Kim is understanding that the United States is giving him this opportunity to do the right thing, but Kim's not taking advantage of it. And I think President Trump's going to have to go back to that maximum pressure campaign.
Well, as he just told our correspondent at the White House, Mark Irons, he said, we will. Gordon Chang, Daily Beast columnist and author of the book Nuclear Showdown. Thank you for joining us. Stay with us. Up next, a veteran Washington Politico explains why she thinks it might be time to get rid of Supreme Court nominee hearings. Plus, Pope Francis and an Irish rock star, an international star, are working together in the name of love. Chances of a Supreme Court position for Judge Brett Kavanaugh, a lifelong Catholic, are in jeopardy. This is following an allegation of sexual assault. Even before the charge was made public, one former RNC official who has spent 3 decades here in politics and journalism said it was time to change the confirmation process. And here she is, joining me now, Genevieve Woods, Senior Communications Advisor at the Heritage Foundation, Senior Contributor for the Daily Signal. Welcome back to the program.
Good to be here.
You know Washington politics inside and out, the policy, the process. It surprised me to read that you said that these Supreme Court confirmation hearings have become useless. What was it about watching Kavanaugh that made you think that?
Well, I mean, I think we knew before the day one of the hearings exactly how everybody on that committee was going to vote and probably how most of the Senate was going to vote. And we've seen that over the years, but at this one, there was no doubt about it. And it was a circus. Day one, you had 70 protesters thrown out on day one of the hearings. The next day, on average, every minute you had a protester interrupting. This became political gamemanship. It wasn't about getting to the bottom of this. And by the way, it's not in the Constitution. It does not say that the Senate must hold confirmation hearings. It says it must vote to give the president to advise a consent. But you don't have to do what they're doing now.
So you wrote this before the allegations of sexual misconduct against Judge Kavanaugh came out. That was almost 30 years ago, those allegations. Do you still feel, despite that the hearings are useless?
Well, I mean, we had all these hearings and we had all these private meetings with senators, and none of this came up. Even though Senator Dianne Feinstein on the Judiciary Committee had this letter, knew all about these allegations, back in July, we went through hours of hearings, hours of behind closed door sessions with the judge and the individual Senate members, and none of this was brought forward. So what do we need hearings for if they're going to wait till after all that's done to then throw this out into the media?
What about how President Trump is handling this? He has continued to commend Judge Kavanaugh, his credentials, and has avoided personal comments about Dr. Ford.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the right thing. I mean, look, nobody knows the truth except for, I guess, Judge Kavanaugh and Ms. Ford, right? The difference is that Judge Kavanaugh has said, not only do I deny all of this, I'm willing to go back and have hearings and testify about all of this. She said these things happened, but she's not saying she wants to come forward now and testify on all of this. So it is a he said, she said. The president doesn't know, but he's right now taking, I think, the word of his nominee, who by every other account has great integrity, and there's no proof that he did this.
How is this going to play out with Republicans and Democrats? Who has more to lose?
Well, I think if she does not come forward and see this through, it's one thing to make accusations, but if you make them and then you're not willing to come in and testify and back them up, I think that does not just damage to her credibility, but frankly the Me Too movement at large. Because if you're another woman out there who does have a real story,
You're saying she doesn't have a real story?
Well, I don't know. If she's not willing to back it up, if she said she wanted to testify, her lawyer said she wanted to testify, the Senate Judiciary Committee has given her a platform to testify, and now she's saying, no, I want to wait again and have another investigation first. Look, she was there. The FBI wasn't there. She says she was there. She needs to tell people what happened.
But what she's saying is it's going to be my word against his, and you need to investigate that.
And that will be the case with nobody else was in that room. The people that she said was in the room have denied that this happened. So I can't imagine they're going to tell the FBI anything different. And the FBI has also said, we've investigated him 6 times. This 36-year-old allegation is not something we would step in and investigate. They've come out and said this is basically politics.
And Kavanaugh does deny the allegations.
He
does. We
does.
have to talk about that. We're running out of time here. Thank you so much for coming in to talk about what you're calling these useless confirmation hearings.
Do we know any more today than we did before?
Thank you so much. Genevieve Woods, Senior Communications Advisor at the Heritage Foundation. The lead singer of the rock band U2 finds himself stuck in a moment. That's one of his songs. With Pope Francis at the Vatican. Actually, it was 30 moments.
His Holiness was incredibly gracious with his time, with his concentration. We let the conversation go where it wanted to go.
The two discussed fighting worldwide poverty and education initiatives, but they also talked about the clergy abuse scandal The singer says the Holy Father is aghast at the revelations, and he said, quote, "You could see the pain in his eyes. I felt it was sincere."
Termine ebraico indica la gloria.
And finally, tonight, Pope Francis says to those who honor their parents, they lead the happiest lives. Yeah, kids, listen to that. Hey, kids at home, are you listening to me? At his talk at the Vatican, the Holy Father says mothers and fathers are not perfect, but children should always be grateful to them for the gift of life. While we're fighting over homework, I will ask them to remember that. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.